Good.
Okay, so we should introduce ourselves because this is actually starting now.
We should, yeah.
We are Abnormal Mapping. I'm Matthew Marco.
I'm Jackson Tyler.
And we are doing Read for Speed, in which I'm going to read the Need for Speed novelization based on the movie, based on the video game. And Jackson is going to be playing Burnout Paradise, the actual good racing game that has been sacrificed because Need for Speed makes money,
Yep.
and Burnout does not.
I would give them money. They're not letting me give them money.
I know. Well, I mean, they tried. They made Burnout crash. That was really bad.
Yeah, I can't buy. Why can't I buy the DLC?
Don't complain about Big Surf Island now. The moment has passed. So, I'm going to read this book. Jackson's going to drive and react to this dumb book. I'm sure it's terrible. The book is about 280 pages long. We're going to be doing it in 4 parts. This first part, and then the next one's on subsequent Sundays, which will be great because we will have seen the movie in the middle of this project.
Yeah.
And know whether or not it's actually good or not.
And at some point, you can look forward to our reactions to the masterpiece that is Need for Speed: The Cinematic Experience.
I have not done a live read of this length ever, so I've got water, but let's see how this goes. I'm pretty used to talking to microphones for hours, though, so...
You have a pop screen. You're a professional. You'll be fine.
Yeah, you have one too.
I
You're
have
not a
one.
professional.
We've both got the same setup now. So
Yep.
I no longer sound like garbage. It's pretty great. I am more British than ever.
I'm
apparently.
going to read the book now.
Okay, read the book.
Alright. Need for Speed by Brian Keller. Kelleher? Too many E's. 1. Mount Kisco, New York. The cops were waiting for them this time. When they were tipped that yet another illegal street race was about to take place in their sleepy little town, the Mount Kisco police had decided to go on the offensive. The Night Watch commander had assembled 3 patrol squad cars whose sole duty would be to stop the alleged race. To this end, he'd equipped them with some extraordinary tools. 3 new, highly accurate radar guns, 3 extra sets of walkie-talkies, and borrowed from the New York State Police a spike strip. This device was composed of a collection of metal spikes, 2 inches long and pointing upward, attached to a rigid plastic strip. The idea was to throw the strip in front of any car that needed to be stopped and allow it to puncture the car's tires, grinding the lawbreakers to a halt. It seemed like a drastic measure, but the police felt it had come to this. There was a culture of illegal street racing in Mount Kisco, most of whose participants were local teenagers or young men in their 20s, and all were well known to the police. But no arrest could stick without catching one of the perpetrators in the act. Truth was, the street racers were all extremely skilled drivers and absolutely fearless. Their cars were highly modified with illegal equipment that made them go light years faster than a normal passenger vehicle. In the past, the street racers had made short work of ditching any police cars that took up their pursuit. Tonight, the Mount Kisco PD hoped to turn the tables. 3 extra squad cars were positioned along the illegal race's suspected route. Were you going to say something?
Did no editor tell him that light years is a measure of distance?
Distance is just a matter of speed.
You went kilometers
Time.
faster in that graphically prepared illegal. This is already the dumbest book I've ever read. No group of teenagers or men in their early 20s is fearless and talented in every way. I'm sorry.
I know some former teenage street racers. They're pretty dumb, and they're all driving really terrible cars.
Right.
So,
Already off to a fantastic start here. I'm on the edge of my seat. Do carry on.
one cruiser was hidden in an alley in the downtown business district. Another was near the cemetery along Lexington Avenue, and the third was stationed next to the statue of Chief Kisco in the intersection of routes 133 and 117. Is there a map in the back of this book or something?
Yeah, it shows you the provinces.
The tipster had claimed the race would start at midnight, but it was at 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes early, that 3 cars came blazing into town. They were a 1968 Gran Torino, a 1969 Camaro, and a 1966 Pontiac GTO. They went by the first squad car so fast and so unexpectedly, the officer behind the wheel couldn't get his engine started quick enough. The trio of racers was gone before he could even get his squad car in gear. Forced to call ahead to the second squad car, the policeman discovered his walkie-talkie was filled with static and interference. The same was true for his squad car's dashboard radio. As a result, he could hear his colleague, and his colleague couldn't hear him. It was almost as if someone was jamming their communications.
Almost.
No pursuit was possible because the first police car couldn't confirm where the 3 speeders had gone. The officer finally used his cell phone to call ahead to the second cruiser, which was lying in wait near the Lexington Avenue Cemetery. But the 3 racers had already rocketed by this location as well, and the second squad car's new radar gun failed to register a thing. The 3 cars were suddenly there, going by at more than 100 miles per hour, and like stealthy phantoms, they were just as suddenly gone.
As opposed to...
I'm pretty sure 3 muscle cars driving by at 100 miles per hour are not stealthy phantoms by any reasonable definition.
Did someone not cross out stealthy and put irrelevant? Like, you know, those phantoms that make all the noise? Those phantoms that just wreck everything.
The second cop had seen the 3 cars only in a blur, but still he knew they were breaking a long list of laws. Speeding, going down one-way streets, reckless driving, driving without license plates, and, most probably, carrying illegal jamming equipment. All the second policeman could do was head off in the same direction in which the 3 fast cars had disappeared. But as soon as he pulled out of his hiding spot, he nearly collided with the first squad car, which had reached its position at almost the same moment. All this time, both officers had been frantically trying to contact the colleague in the 3rd squad car to tell him the racers were probably heading in his direction and to drop the spike strip. But the interference on the radios continued unabated and communication seemed impossible. As it turned out, a cop in squad car number 3 had heard the trio of racers approaching. The highly modified cars made a lot of noise when their engines were at full throttle. At that point, he jumped out of his car and flung the spike strip across Route 117 right near the Chief Kisco statue. Then he heard behind his cruiser, then he retreated behind his cruiser, not knowing what to expect once the speeding cars hit the spikes. But that didn't happen. Showing off their incredible driving skills, the 3 drivers simply avoided the spike strip by going up and over the curb and driving along the road's shoulder until they were past the tire-popping device. They did this while going in excess of 100 miles per hour. After that, the road straightened out and the 3 cars simply upshifted to their highest gear and were gone. It was only later that the Mount Kisco police realized their tip had come from one of the racers themselves. Being chased by the police was part of the allure of illegal street racing.
Is that the first chapter? Are we...
No, it's the first. Now there are the 3 asterisks. This is another section of the first chapter.
Wow.
Mount Kisco was located in upstate New York, about 10 miles east of the Hudson River, and just a half-hour north of New York City. With a population of 10,000, the town was known as a bedroom community for high-priced executives who worked in Manhattan, as well as a haven for the mega-rich. Secluded places like Guard Hill, Mount Kisco Chase, and Glassbury Court had homes so extravagant that only the fabulously wealthy could afford them. You saying there's illegal street races in a place called Mount Kisco Chase? Go figure. The downtown business district was made up of mostly designer boutiques, posh clothing stores, foofy coffee shops, and expensive restaurants. And at close to 200 acres, the Mount Kisco Country Club took up nearly 1/10 of the town. But Mount Kisco had a poor section too. The Lexington Avenue neighborhood on the west side was home to families living below the poverty line. Most townies avoided the area, though this was where drugs could be bought. Local high school students, pupils of nearby John Lay Prep School, SUNY students, and even some residents from the affluent east side were known to visit Lexington Ave on occasion. Weed was especially easy to obtain there, usually at reasonable prices.
Is this just a remake of The Great Gatsby, but in Need Speed Racing?
Still, the town's crime rate was very low. Since the police had so little to do, they frequently harassed the local teenagers at their hangouts, like the Applebee's on Main Street. And they especially enjoyed busting up underage drinking parties at Pride Rock and under the town's water tower. Stopping the town's rash of illegal street racing, however, was still a work in progress. There was an auto repair garage just north of downtown called Marshall Motors. It was a well-known place, having been in business for 40 years. It was a large, square, open building with a washed stone facade, many windows, and a rather grand covered entrance reminiscent of a hotel. Signs on the outside advertised bodywork and tune-ups. There were 4 bay doors, plus room for many cars out front and along the sides. On this day, a handful of cars were parked outside, all with various ailments, waiting to be serviced. Inside, a 2004 Taurus was on the main lift, getting its brakes redone. In the next bay over, a 2007 Neon was awaiting its inspection sticker. Next to the Neon, a classic 1970 Chevelle, stripped of chrome and glass and covered in primer gray, was about to go in the paint booth for its final coat. The garage was a highly organized place, with hundreds of car parts neatly sorted on shelves and walls. Canisters of premium auto paint dominated one corner. The mechanics at Marshall Motors didn't just fix cars, they also painted them, restored them, and, if it was the right set of wheels, transformed them into street racers, packed with illegal equipment that could make them go very fast. The employees of Marshall Motors were well known to the police, too. This book is stupid.
Yep.
I'm on page 9, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Mount Cisco had a different kind of economy when the garage first opened in 1974. Wait. Okay, I was about to say 40 years. This was... okay. It does take place in this year. For a second, my mental math broke, and I thought, does this movie take place in 2004? Back then, most people were making a good wage, and many families had 2 or more cars. When they needed an oil change, or an engine tune-up, or a dent pounded out, many of them came to Marshall's, and the business thrived. I'm just going to say, this is America. If you have both parents who work, you have 2 cars. Because you have to have a car to have a job in any city that is not New York or LA or San Francisco. Sorry.
The important interlude about cars and cities.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But the money streams had changed in more recent years as the town's rich got richer. Yep. They bought BMWs, Benzes, and Bentleys and wound up bringing them to their dealers for service. Meanwhile, the poor got poorer and found they had to change their own oil or tune up their cars themselves and forget about fixing the dents. Caught in the middle, Marshall Motors had suffered, especially lately. Even the customizing work was tailing off these days. This morning, even though 5 cars were waiting to get in, there were a dozen empty customer parking spots outside, and 2 of the bays were vacant. Business could have been better. Wait, if there's 5 cars waiting to get in, why do they have the bays vacant?
I don't know what that's implying. It's clearly implying that people want to get in, but they're too poor to afford it. But if they're too poor, why would they be waiting outside?
Photographs covered one wall inside the garage. They showed a happy kid in various stages of growing up, along with cars around him. At 4 years old, he was smiling and posing in a bumper car at a local carnival. At 8, he was photographed racing go-karts, again wearing a huge grin. By 10 years old, the boy was in a helmet racing shifter cars. In these photos, he could be seen holding all kinds of racing trophies, always smiling, always with his proud parents standing nearby.
Nah.
But after that, the photos told another story.
No!
On his reaching 11 or so, the boy's mother was suddenly absent from the photos, and the boy was never photographed smiling again.
I can just see the shot in the film as it pans along, and just the most sour-faced kid.
He and his father appeared in a half dozen more shots taken over the next 10 years inside the garage while they were repairing cars, both stone-faced and lost in their work. Then the photographs stopped altogether. 4 young men were in the garage today. 3 of them were working. One was Benny Garrett. He was a sunny African-American and the possessor of a big personality. Benny was the garage's gasser or paint mechanic. His work was considered by all to be exceptional. He'd been discharged recently from the army. Well, he'd originally joined the service to get out of Mount Kisco. Where he went instead was Iraq and Afghanistan as part of a helicopter ground crew. He'd seen how the muffler shops in Fallujah had been turned into bomb-making factories, and how many Afghan farmers had their own working tanks needed to keep thieves away from their poppy fields. I don't think this is how the army works. Very little of the time in the army had been cool or exciting, and he'd seen enough death and destruction to last several lifetimes. When he returned home after 4 years and 3 combat tours, he vowed never to leave Mount Kisco again. But he'd also brought home with him a head full of stories about his time in the sandbox. And as he was always known for his vivid imagination, Benny's friends took these tales with a grain of salt, just Benny being Benny. In the next bay...
That post-traumatic stress disorder suffering Benny, what a laugh riot.
In the next bay, making adjustments to the front suspension of the 1968 custom-built Ford Gran Torino were the shop's chief mechanics, Joe Peck and Finn. Joe was the oldest of the group, well into his 30s. He was a big guy, huge arms and chest, a fanatic in the weight room. With a dark face and eyes, he possessed a bushy but well-defined goatee, and more often than not, he had a toothpick hanging from his lips.
At what page does he betray the group?
I don't know. Joe had been at Marshall Motors the longest of the four. Having gotten a job sweeping up the place at age of 7, he never really left. He'd learned the mechanic's trade from the business's founder and turned out to be one of the best grease monkeys in Westchester County. I just want to say, 1970 whatever, it was not legal to have 7-year-olds sweeping your floor.
That's just how...
In this event,
I don't know if you know, but he has mentioned several times the illegality of the street racing scene.
That's true. Destiny asked who wrote this. It was Brian Kelleher, Kelleher. I don't know who that is.
I Amazoned him. He has that, and he had another book in some weird series. I don't know what else he's done really. It was a series about planes fighting that he's written a book in.
Finn was the opposite of Joe. He was small, pale, with lighter hair and sad features. He was 25 and was the only one of the 4 who'd attended college. Although he carried a business and finance degree at a nearby SUNY campus, he hated office life and never truly pursued a professional career. The day after getting his sheepskin, he was back at Marshall's, changing oil and installing shock absorbers. The 4th young man was Little Pete. Barely 5'4", he was aptly named. There's our answer. You're asking whether Little Pete was ironic or not. It is not.
No, this is 2014. In 5 years' time, Little Pig will be big again.
Fair-skinned with a James Dean haircut, he was a powerhouse in his own way. If he was considered the little brother of the Marshall Motors crew, he was also the most knowledgeable when it came to cars and racing, legal or otherwise. He was also an excellent driver and owned a very sweet 1969 Chevy Camaro that he'd reconditioned from the wheels up practically by himself.
It's very sweet, you know. It's so sweet.
Pete was rarely seen without his iPad, and today was no different. It was 2 p.m. and his favorite streaming video show was coming on. It was called Underground Racing. It was hosted by a very nutty guy named Monarch.
Are you sure?
I assume Monarch is Michael Keaton. Be my guess.
One would assume.
The show was passionately devoted to the street racing culture. Souped-up cars competing against each other on city streets and public highways at speed frequently in excess of 150 miles per hour. This was not drag racing run on a track and sanctioned by a thick rule book. This was about going as fast as you could go on the open road with powerful but illegally modified cars, sometimes for money, but mostly for the adrenaline rush, which was always substantial.
It's a running battle with the drivers. Take them down.
Though the modern version of the sport began in Japan, with enthusiasts racing each other on curving mountain roads, its history in the United States went back much further. This is when they put in the Wikipedia drop. Just copy-paste. Back in the days of...
They didn't invent drifting in the mountains.
Back in the days of Prohibition, bootleggers jacked up the power of their car engines so they could shake off any pursuing law enforcement. Once booze was legal again, the bootleggers took to racing each other in their modified cars, and American street racing was born. These days, technology and the right mechanic could take a typical great consumer automobile and double, or even triple, its engine's output to 500 horsepower or more. But that was just the beginning. Ultra-expensive vehicles, built especially for this kind of thing, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and Bugattis, could easily double that figure. With these cars, speeds of 200 miles per hour or more were not unheard of, making them blurs to people keeping to the speed limit on interstates or simply driving on city streets. The unapproachable speed, unapproachable in quotes, the holy grail of speed racing, was somewhere around 250 miles per hour. That could be traveling 1 mile every 15 seconds. Like breaking the sound barrier in a jet fighter, such velocity in car could be exhilarating. But it took only one wrong move and the person behind the wheel would, more often than not, wind up dead.
So at the end of the book or film, whatever, he is going to achieve that speed in a face-off against his rival, right?
I'm pretty sure that if you make the wrong move at 100 miles per hour, you're going to end up dead.
I have...
Just...
Yeah. There must be a point
at which... even just at highway speed, which is 60, if you make the wrong move, you're going to be dead. Because guess what? Cars are dangerous.
They're going fast and they're big metal tanks. They're pretty... Doesn't really matter how fast you're going. Shit can get fucked up pretty easily.
Monarch was the perfect host for the underground racing program. There was a great mystique about him. He broadcast the show from a secret location known only to him. his viewers could see was in a glass booth with a microphone and a camera in front of him, but little else. The only clue to his whereabouts was the occasional sound of seagulls his followers could hear cawing in the background off camera. Monarch was a real man of mystery and a bad heart. It was rumored that he'd had a dalliance as a professional race car driver, but his heart stopped like a watch one day, so he quit. Legend also had it that he'd sponsored a few Formula One teams for races at top venues like Monte Carlo. But even here, he was said to be highly secretive, always campaigning under assumed names. Beyond that, very little was known about him. I feel like that's a lot, actually.
Yeah, beyond a large amount of information related to his history and upbringing.
I don't know that much about some podcasts I listen to. Monarch's streaming podcast was private, by invitation only, and he was very discriminating about who he invited to his party.
Monarch's
Still,
Kickstarter.
he had his huge, if discreet, following. Little Pete was one of his biggest fans. He's really on fire today, Little Pete said now, turning on the iPad's volume so others in the garage could hear. Suddenly, Monarch's voice was bouncing off the walls. Caller, listen, caller, he was barking, fast talking as always. Did you just call me the Oracle of Delphi? Well, the De Leon is my race, and it's beautiful, and you can bet the crack in your ass that I am the Oracle of Delphi when it comes to who gets invited to race De Leon and who doesn't. So sow that crack because you're talking out your ass and I'm not listening. That's a really awkward way of telling someone to shut up. The 4 members of the Marshall Street team laughed. Monarch was the Howard Stern of the underground racing world, and he was one seriously funny dude. Obviously, this was written by someone in their 40s, because nobody who cares about anything at the age of 20 gives a shit about Howard Stern.
Little Pete turned to Toby. Man, he's just like the Jay Leno of the underground racing world. He's the Citizen Kane of racing.
By the way, I have some local results, Monarch's voice crackled again. The Flying Hawaiian just took down Steve Heavy Chevy in the Arizona desert. And the word is, it wasn't very pretty. Now remember, that rivalry isn't over yet, you cretins, but the Flying Hawaiian did just get closer to an invitation to this year's De Leon as the wild card. What's a cretin, you ask? If you weren't such cretins, you'd know what a cretin is. De Leon is in 1 week, Motorhead, so keep the motherfucking need for speed.
Yes!
Man, they did not. They did not. I would have held that back.
No, I would have put that end of second act, heading into the climax. I've got the need for speed, drive off. But I don't know. They add the game. I hope they cast the guy who plays the DJ in Burnout Paradise to be Monarch.
I'm pretty sure Monarch's Michael Keaton.
Is he? Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Which is a pretty good choice, to be fair.
Is it always a great choice? In my mind, he is this terrible DJ in Burnout.
Destiny asked what page that line is in. That is page 15.
The magic never stops.
The De Leon was the Super Bowl of underground racing. While the entrants are always handpicked by Monarch himself, the participating cars were never less than the multi-million-dollar Lamborghinis, Bugattis, McLarens, and Salines. The race was held in a different place every year. The location kept a closely guarded secret until shortly before it began. It was almost always a brutal, cutthroat competition whose winner, if there was one left standing, got to keep all the expensive cars that managed to cross the finish line. The highly illegal race was always the bane of whatever law enforcement agency whose jurisdiction it happened to fall under, and street racing fans counted the days before the next De Leon would be run. The Marshall Motors mechanics stayed entranced by the show even as they continued to work, all except Joe Peck. As he looked through the doors of the garage, something caught his attention outside. A 60-year-old man in a business suit was talking to the garage's young owner, Toby Marshall, the boy depicted in the photographs. Toby was in his mid-20s now. How would we know? They haven't had pictures for years. Tough-looking but handsome and in good shape. He could have been a dead ringer for actor Steve McQueen. Wasn't somebody else already looking like Steve McQueen?
No,
or was that James Dean?
There's
okay.
Bill Pete had some James Dean-esqueness about him.
Okay.
There's a dead ringer for actor Aaron Paul.
Aaron Paul does not look like Steve McQueen by any goddamn definition.
So, the script clearly... this was written a while ago. It was written when, I don't know.
But right now, Joe Peck sensed he had a weight of the world on his shoulders. Joe moved closer to the open bay doorway and tried to eavesdrop on the conversation. I loved your dad, he heard the older man telling Toby. He was a customer of our bank for 30 years. This is very hard for me. But you're 6 months behind on the mortgage for this place, and there's nothing more I can do to help you out. We'll have to foreclose on you if you can't come up with the payment within the next week. So this is just the Brady Bunch movie.
It's just Racketeer.
Toby didn't reply. He just nodded and awkwardly shook hands with the man. Then he watched in silence as the man got in his car and drove away. As soon as Toby walked back into the garage, he realized Joe had been watching the conversation, and maybe listening in as well. "Who was that guy?" Joe asked him. "Just an old customer of my dad's," Toby replied quietly. "I didn't recognize him," Joe said. "He may bring his car in next week," Toby added. "Oh yeah? What's wrong with it?" Joe asked. Toby took a moment, then replied a little testily, "It's our job to find out, right?" Joe studied his friend for a moment. Toby's father was the reason Joe was in this business. He was the one who'd hired him as a kid to sweep the garage, and in the process taught him just about everything there was to know about what made cars run, and run fast. "Is your mind on tonight's race?" Joe asked Toby. Toby just shrugged. "Well, I want to get there early," Joe continued. 5 cars are racing, so that means the pot will be like $5,000, Toby said, finishing the sentence for him, and then adding a bit soberly, "Believe me, I know." It was Toby's car on the lift in the garage's first bay. Built in 1968, the Gran Torino Fastback was a somewhat ordinary vehicle at its inception, though, like Toby, many enthusiasts had embraced it as a platform for competing either legally or on the streets. Toby's Gran Torino was well known to street racing fans in upstate New York and indeed throughout the country. He'd installed a rebuilt 5.4-liter aluminum big block engine in it with fuel injection and a supercharger. Huge headers, exhaust pipes, and twin mufflers were added to the package, along with a 6-speed manual transmission and an especially heavy-duty clutch. The car sat on 4 radial drag racing tires mounted on old-school mag wheels and had cobalt blue acrylic paint covering its body with white racing stripes added tastefully along the sides and atop the hood. Car descriptions are the most terrible thing.
And
why would you do
this?
this?
Book is 90% car descriptions. His
The
writing
paint
is very
scheme
sweet.
and striping made the car look both unusual and elegant, but most important, it was fast. Stripped of any needless or extra weight, it could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds. Astonishing for such an ordinary design. What's more, its suspension had been improved through the skills of Joe Peck and Finn, so that it cornered like a dream, and was also excellent at drifting. That manner of taking a turn not in the usual way, but by oversteering so that all 4 wheels temporarily lost traction, allowing the car to go in a turn sideways in the kind of high-speed controlled skid. In the world of underground racing, a driver's talent at drifting spoke volumes about the driver himself. Toby was one of the best in the country at it. This was one of the reasons Toby was so well known to the street racing community. All those years, from crashing cars to present, All those years from crashing cars to present, he had put to good use. He had an instinct about driving, almost a sixth sense. When he started his car, he felt it became part of him, like some fighter pilots say when they climb into their airplanes. And he'd always raced for fun. But now, after a visit from the man from the bank, he knew he might have to start racing for something more. I don't think a muscle car can drift. I mean, I know that's how Tokyo Drift ends, but I'm pretty sure that's not how those cars are built to do.
And that's the point of the end of Tokyo Drift. They don't
Yes.
drift. So they have to...
Hey, it's Atomica here on Crash FM.
yeah,
you know,
the
one
deep
of the
metaphor
great
of
things
Tokyo
about
Drift.
Paradise City is you don't need a garage at your
Chapter
house.
2.
Because you can
Oh.
stash
Let
your
me
whole
take-
collection of cars in any of the local
Well,
junkyards.
So what even
Just
happened
drop
in
by
that
the
first
nearest
chapter?
one and slip
He
into
got
something
Well,
by someone
Crazy
in the
driving
bank.
style.
Obviously, there's driving happening in this town. The town is a weird classist thing going on. And Toby runs an illegal shop, but he's also like a good guy, I think. And and there he's got a race because they're gonna foreclose his
Race
shop. It's his
southeast to the
dad's shop.
Wildcats
His dad's
baseball
obviously no longer around.
Glad they set up exactly the stakes in the goal. Has Toby saved the cat?
No, but I'm sure that's about to happen.
Okay. Let's do this.
It was-
Chapter 2.
It was Saturday night. Traditionally, many of Mount Kisco's teenagers could cop some beer and head for Pride Rock for a drinking party. But something else was going on tonight. Something somewhat secret.
Racing!
And it was happening at the Mount Kisco Drive-In Theater. I'm pretty sure nothing secret happens at a movie theater.
They were showing a movie on a large, loud screen. No one had heard about this for years.
The sign at the drive-in's entrance was slightly misleading. It announced a car show, a $10 entry fee, a barbecue, and some raffles. But something else was going to happen here. Something the cops hadn't been tipped about. People had started gathering inside the drive-in shortly after dark. Through scenes from Bullet, one of the best car chase films ever made. But being projected on the drive-in's huge screen, the crowd wasn't on hand to watch movies either. They were there to see a real street race, or at least the beginning of one. The drive-in's parking lot... Wait, what?
They're just there to watch the cars just leave and go, that was good.
I mean, that's half of spectating racing, right? Like, they drive by and then that's the end.
Yeah, but at least the actual racing, there's like, you know, cameras and stuff that keep you up to date with what's going on. This is literally
That's
just
why
they watch the
that's why
leader.
NASCAR is popular, because the cars stay there.
Yeah, they go around the circle.
You can just drive the whole time.
But the book acknowledging awareness of the fact that they're just watching cars leave a car park is pretty amazing.
The drive-in's parking lot was jammed with spectators by the time Toby arrived. It was close to 11 p.m., and there was a drunken country fair atmosphere around the place. With everyone in good spirits, the crowd gladly parted to allow his Gran Torino to get through. Inside his highly customized car, Toby and his crew were tuned into Monarch's show on Pete's iPad. So it obviously has 3G, like in the mountains, which is like pretty surprising.
Yeah, he's got his.
Unless they have that municipal Wi-Fi. I mean, it is a rich town.
They do. The movie theater has the cloud, the power of the cloud.
They were about to get a big surprise. The underground host had a caller on the line. Word is out, De Leon is going to be held in New Hampshire this year, the caller said. Is that true, Monarch? You'll never know, Monarch snapped back at him, because you're... What? Because you just tip off the cops, and no one wants that. No one likes a snitch, am I right? The Gran Torino erupted in cheers. And by the way, Monarch continued, the results from Austin just came in. Texas Mike has posted a win. Monarch took another caller. This one asked, why does Texas Mike have a shot at the De Leon and I don't? Monarch erupted. Because Texas Mike's McLaren F1 is worth $1.2 million, can do 240 miles per hour, and he can drive, he shouted. And you and your rolling bucket of bullets can't. The Oracle has spoken. More cheers from the Marshall crew. Monarch paused a moment, then went on.
Does he
But
turn
you
to
know,
everyone and go, can you dig it? Is this what's happening right now?
but you know, he said, his voice unusually subdued. Tonight I got my nose open on Mount Kisco, New York. This perked up the ears of everyone in the Gran Torino. You're shitting me? Benny breathed. Did he just say Mount Kisco? The other shushed him as Monarch continued. I'm interested in that one-horse town tonight because Toby Marshall and Jimmy McIntosh are going to duke it out in a field of 5 cars, Monarch declared. That's a real scrappy circuit up there, and from what I hear, Toby Marshall's a hell of a driver.
Must suck to be one of those other 3.
Just another Cinderella looking for a dress for the ball, but I'm serious. If Toby ever got a car worthy of his talents, he just might get an invitation to the De Leon someday. Well, ain't that a bitch, Finn said to Toby. First Monarch gives you a shout-out, then he shits all over your car. You mean our car, Peck reminded everyone. Toby shrugged. That's just the way he is, he said. He finally found a place to park the Gran Torino, and the Marshall team climbed out. Suddenly, little Pete stopped in his tracks, closed his eyes, and acted as if he was receiving some kind of message from the great beyond. He turned to Toby. While Monarch was talking about you just then, I had a vision. Here we go, Finn murmured. Quiet, Benny said with a laugh. I love hearing the kids' visions. Little Pete began. I saw water and the sun and your sister in a hot bikini, Finn interjected with a laugh. Shut it, Little Pete scolded him. This is serious. He composed himself and continued. I saw Toby in this vision, he said. And you know what? He's gonna win the De Leon. No shit, Finn said with good-natured sarcasm. Toby Marshall is gonna win the crown jewel of underground racing against McLarens and Bugattis, and wait, is this gonna happen this year? Finn was right. Small illegal street races happened all the time, and they almost exclusively involved cars that were customized stock cars anyone could buy, such as Camaros, Mustangs, or Gran Torinos. But again, the De Leon was at the other end of the rainbow, involving high-end foreign-built cars like Lambos and Bugs. If any American-built cars were involved, they were usually sonically priced Mustang GTs, and maybe... Sonically priced? What does that even mean? And maybe... on the Odd Mood Monday, a Chevy Corvette, but that happened very rarely.
I don't like the subtext of building that's, man, why can't American cars win? All those foreign cars taking all our street racing wins.
As was usually the case, it was a question of the haves and the have-nots. If Toby had been able to recoup the sweet equity he and the others had put into his Gran Torino, his price tag might reach 20 grand or so. The cars that race in the De Leon, their tires cost that much. Still, Toby appreciated Little Pete's enthusiasm. Thanks for your vote of confidence, Pete, Toby said. He'd just spotted his main competitor for the night, a driver named Jimmy McIntosh. I'll have my hands full just trying to beat Jimmy. Toby nodded to McIntosh's tricked-out 1966 Pontiac GTO, just pulling into the lot.
Could they not describe the car as Toby looked at Jimmy's car? It was a car. They have to list every single one.
Just wait, it was a beautiful car. Dark 383 boosted engine, Holley quad carbs, big tires, big rear gears, and an enormous exhaust system. But Toby's friends were looking in the other direction. What the hell? Little Pete whispered. A Mercedes SLR had driven into the parking lot. This was a very luxurious car. It was silver, low slung, and shaped like some kind of futuristic bullet, with 4 huge wheels attached. When seen in the company of the Ford Gran Torino and Pontiac GTO, the SLR was doing some serious slumming. Only a limited number were built every year, and its price range was north of $500,000. The car attracted a lot of attention as it pulled to a stop in the center of the crowd, not just because of its notoriety, but also because of its driver. Shit, is that Dino Brewster? Little Pete said, not wanting to believe his own words. What the hell is he doing back here? Dino Brewster. They had all known him for years. Toby had gone to high school with him, though they'd been at different grade levels. Dino was in his late 20s now, built like a professional athlete and handsome. He was one of those people who always had perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect car, perfect everything. He'd also been one of the richest kids in town. It was never really clear what his father did for a living, or even if his last name was really Brewster. Dino always had money, always had a new bitchin' set of wheels, always had the best clothes. And he'd always stood out. In a school where most kids wore jeans, hoodies, and t-shirts, Dino always wore black, almost like a goth with access to an expensive wardrobe. He was always a real douchebag, too, arrogant and mouthy, but many girls just couldn't resist him. Toby and Dino had been at odds since the first moment they met as young kids. They were just different in many ways. Toby was down to earth, working class, and reluctant to talk about his accomplishments. He didn't mind getting his hands dirty. Dino looked like he'd never done an honest day's work in his life, and was proud of it. An interest in cars was just about the only thing they had in common. This had also led to their many disagreements. They'd had one fist fight, though there could have been many more. The skirmish happened in the locker room after gym class, and Toby gave Dino a definite beatdown. But no one else was around at the time of battle. There were no witnesses, so Dino lied and told another story of the clash. Because of this, the exact winner of the fight was always in dispute. Toby had very few problems with the other people around town. Townies, goths, meatballs, metalheads, nerds. He could get along with just about anyone, but what he didn't like, in fact what he detested, were liars and braggarts, and that was Dino in a nutshell. But Dino also had the infuriating talent of being able to convince lots of people that his version of the truth was the right one. That's what made him so devious. Even people who had been burned by him in the past could fall for it again. That's how good he was. And those suckers could usually realize what had happened only when it was too late, after Dino had gotten what he wanted from them. Toby had raised Dino many times over the years, during high school and beyond, and no matter what luxury car Dino was sporting at the time, Toby always beat him. At least that was not in dispute. But as time went on, Dino had been able to work 24/7 on his driving skills, while Toby had just plain work. Because of his family's wealth and his father's connections, Dino had had the opportunity to practice endlessly at driving high-end cars, while other kids his age were forced to work at McDonald's. Dipping into his father's apparently unlimited pool of money, he was also able to afford driving lessons from some of the top names in the business and get practice time on some of the largest tracks in the Northeast. Most importantly, though, Dino was able to call on his father's friends in the racing world to get him into key races. Small ones at first, then intermediate, then finally on the senior circuit. This was no surprise as he fit the bill. He had movie star looks, drove very expensive cars, could afford a good support team, and had plenty of sponsors. All this, and always with a good heaping of daddy's money, was how he got to race in the Indianapolis 500. In the car culture of Mount Kisco, only Dino had reached that pinnacle. For now. I have to take a break, take a drink. That was a lot to just tell you that this is the bad guy. I'm pretty sure that he'll come out of a car sneering and you'll know.
And
You don't need
in the movie, he'll pan up from his feet. Halfway through the shot, it will cut to the main group as they sneer at him, and then you'll see his face, and then some girls will go, Dino! I've seen this movie before.
At Crash, we've got a saying that goes, float like a fastback, sting like an SUV.
Man.
You gotta choose
Yeah,
for the
page
job.
26.
Then you gotta batter the
Feeling
daylights
it.
out
Wait,
of
already
anything
feeling it.
with
Do you think
wheels
in the
still on
film, at the point he gets out the car, it's going to flash back to young Toby in high school being punched outside
No,
the locker
none
room?
of this is going to happen.
I don't know. I can see that happening.
Where's the part where it's talky and we can get through this faster? There's not a lot of words in this book. It's a lot of descriptions of cars.
Well, the movie is called Need for Speed. It's about car racing.
You'd say that about like Fast and Furious, and those movies are barely about car racing. So,
That's true.
I'd hoped.
I have heard way more talk from the director about it. He really loves cars and car movies. He's like, I want to bring that spirit of old car movies back. That's his plan. He doesn't want to do what we want to do and bring back the spirit of Dom.
Man, I don't even know if I'm going to make it to page 70 today. I really don't.
Exhausting. What chapter? We still in chapter 2?
Yes, we're on page 26.
Page 26. Oh, Jesus, page 26. Let me get to that. As I get to page 26. Oh yeah, for now, ...
That is where I stopped, yes.
I don't know. It looks like the rest of it is more description of Dino. So
I know.
the bad guy, McBad guy, as he appears to be here.
See if we can find a different stopping place that is not as ridiculous.
We'll keep going and see how.
Chapter 3 Chapter 3 starts on page 58. We're going to aim for that.
Okay,
Means we're halfway there.
we're living on a prayer. Yes.
Having Dino arrive for the night's meet was a major buzzkill for the Marshall Motors crew. It brought their lighthearted conversation to a sudden halt, and it only got worse. Soon after the Benz parked, its passenger side door opened and an attractive female stepped out. A, calling her females gross. Please don't do that. B, this is about to get gross. Sure.
By Quark.
She had long brown hair, big eyes, and a gorgeous shape. She radiated slightly as she mixed with the crowd standing around her car, standing out in the throng like a light in the dark. This was Anita, Little Pete's sister. Around town, the adjective usually applied to her was smoking. Toby felt his heart sink on first seeing her. He and she had a past, one that didn't have a happy ending. Anita had been Toby's girlfriend through most of high school and for a few years afterward. They were an it couple. They were almost always together, and when they weren't, they were always texting each other or yapping on the phone. They'd spent so much time together that there was a time when they would finish each other's sentences to the annoyance of their friends. They knew each other's families well. They'd climbed Mount Kisco many times. They'd eaten numerous times at Applebee's. It's not a thing you're nostalgic about.
It's such a great. We ate so much at Applebee's. We were so close.
Had drunk beer at Pride Rock. It was there that they had had their first kiss and their first sex. That's a couple.
Yeah, you say that.
Yeah, like sex is a noun. It's bad.
Do you remember when we had our first sex?
Yep.
I don't know what we're talking about. This is amazing. It's a masterpiece.
As a couple, they'd been happy, witty, and fun to be around. But throughout their relationship, deep down, Toby knew that they were actually different people. They wanted different things and had different dreams. I like that they present this as some sort of problem, that you're different people. His dreams resided within Mount Kisco's area code, to continue his father's business and to build it into one of the best customizing shops in the country, a hope that was fading fast. Her dreams were about 45 miles south, to the glamour of New York City, leaving the small town life behind. So they broke up. She moved to Manhattan and Toby carried on. But not a day went by where he didn't think about her and about what might have been. And now this, Dino and Anita, together. It was the perfect storm of misery for Toby, his ex-girlfriend showing up with his hated rival. I'm sorry, Toby, Little Pete told him. She didn't tell me she was coming home. It's okay, Toby said, trying to convince himself that was the case. But it wasn't. A crowd quickly gathered around Dino's luxurious Mercedes. Meanwhile, Anita had walked a few steps away from the impressive car, and as she did, the crowd quickly closed in around Dino. Many were young motorheads who'd fallen for his charm. They all wanted to take photos with him in his car. Strangely, with the way Anita was dressed, in a slinky, low-cut green dress and sexy mid-calf boots, it almost seemed like she was just another of those young fans lost in the swarm, and not Dino's date for the evening. Do you think he's here because he wants in? Finn asked, watching the little drama unfold. Do you think he wants to race? Screw him, Benny said. We're not letting a $450,000 Mercedes into this race. Try $600,000, Joe Peck corrected him, painfully admiring Dino's car, and that's before the modifications. Maybe he just came to watch how a real race driver drives, Finn said boldly. Maybe he'll learn something here. But Toby just shook his head at the chatter. That guy raced Indy, he told his friends. It doesn't get any more real than that. Yeah, Joe Peck said, but he only lasted a season and a half at Indy. In other words, he sucked, Benny said, but Toby just kept shaking his head. He made the top 5 in 3 races, he said. He didn't suck. Far from it, he knows what he's doing. But you've got to remember, Joe Peck said, he wrecked a guy under a caution flag. That's about as low as you can get. That's why they banned him. Again, it was Dino all over. Finn turning to little Pete. Telling us that your sister was kind of seeing Dino Brewster as one thing, he said, but actually seeing that she is seeing him? That's totally different. That's a real mindfuck. It's a nightmare is what it is, little Pete said gloomily. Meanwhile, the love fest around Dino continued unabated. He signed autographs with the patience of Hollywood's friendliest leading man. Smiling and laughing nonstop, he posed for pictures with the locals. At one point, he tried to pull Anita into some of the photos, but she only posed reluctantly. It was all she could do just to keep smiling. He's posing for pictures of the fans. He's not much of a bad guy, except for what everything they say about him.
He's just a jerk, you know.
He's just a jerk. He's so famous and taking care of the people who like him. Where was I? Man. While the Marshall crew couldn't take their eyes off the little scene, Toby was more affected by it than the rest. But none of them liked it. If your parents had the cash his parents did, Joe Peck said to Toby, you'd be racing open wheel too. Toby just shrugged. Who knows? And you'd be beating him, Finn added, just like you beat him every time you guys went head to head. Toby shook his head again. This one went deep. Not every time, he said sadly. He was looking at Anita when he said this, and now she'd spotted him across the parking lot. Their eyes met. Hundreds of emotions flowed back and forth, slow motion electricity bouncing between the two of them. She broke the spell by giving him a little wave. All he could do was nod back at her. That's when she started walking in his direction. Oh shit, Joe Peck said. This can't be good. The gang immediately surrounded Toby. Let it go, man, Finn said, trying to get Toby out of her line of sight. You don't need the distraction. But Toby shook his head again. It's okay, he said. It's cool. But his words didn't convince anyone, including himself. Joe Peck turned to Benny. You better get going, dude, he told him, checking his watch. The race is going to start soon. Benny smiled and swung his arms behind him as if they were wings. He began to sing, I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. I'm pretty sure that's racist. With that, Benny flew off, pretending to be some kind of human singing bird. Benny being Benny. What? Great.
This book is far more... I mean, I expected it to be gross. It's way more gross than I expected.
A moment later, Anita arrived. She was even prettier up close, but she was very shy as well. Hey guys, she said sweetly. Hey Petey. Hey little Pete replied, almost under his breath. He hadn't seen her in a while. They hugged, and Anita asked him, are you racing tonight? Yep, he replied curtly. Well, be careful, okay? She told him sincerely. Pete just nodded. Then Anita turned towards Toby. The rest of the group took their cue and wandered away. Toby and Anita were alone. She touched his arm, just for an instant, but it sent a jolt through him. Hi, Toby, she said, trying to smile. Anita, Toby said with a nod, trying to stay cool. I was really sorry to hear about your dad, she said, softly. You got the flowers, didn't you? Toby nodded again. This was very uncomfortable. There was a long pause. He stared at the ground, and Anita stared at him. She had stopped trying to smile. The look in her eyes said it all. She should have stayed with him. He's looking at the ground. He doesn't know. I feel like this is presumptuous and gross, for the record.
I feel like she made the right choice.
They know
This is what I'm
paradise
getting from this.
inside and out.
Anita broke silence. Thanks for watching out for Pete, she said. Toby just shrugged. Glad to do it. He's like a little brother to me. Her smile returned briefly. How's the shop, she asked, trying to sound cheerful. Truth was, it was harder for her to talk to Toby than it was for him to talk to her. Fine, Toby lied. Everything's going good. Anita was a little surprised to hear this. Really? Well, that's nice. She was trying to best... My inflection makes that sound worse than it probably is supposed to, but I don't care.
I don't know, I feel that
She was
pretty
trying-
close to the actual
She was trying her best to hide the skepticism in her voice. There was another awkward silence. Now it was Toby who broke it. So how's the big city? He asked her. Different than I expected, I guess, she replied. But it's not here, that's for sure. Toby forced a smile. You still allergic to Mount Kisco? Anita almost laughed. Bleh. You still think you're funny, huh? She said. Well, I'll tell you. There's a few things left in Mount Kisco that I really like. Like the Applebee's, obviously.
Yeah. Such a
Toby
great
shook his head a little. Seems like you found what you're looking for. Anita knew what he was talking about. Dino. I'm taking it real slow, she said, almost like she had to convince herself. Toby looked her right in the eye. Dino's not a guy who takes anything slow, he said, carefully pronouncing every syllable. She glanced right back at him. Then you should have moved a little quicker, she scolded him. A third awkward silence, but this time their eyes were locked on each other. Is that what you came here to tell me? He asked her in a harsh whisper. She shook her head. No, it isn't, she replied. In fact, Dino has something he wants to talk to you about. Something important. I doubt that, Toby said. It's true, she said, but not until after the race. I don't want to distract you.
I worked it out. Toby's Ron Weasley.
Pretty much. Toby had had enough. He said to her, then you should have stayed in Manhattan. With that, he walked away. It was almost midnight. Joe Peck was standing under the Mount Kisco overpass, the finish line for the upcoming race. Crews for all the cars competing in the race were standing nearby. Finn was also there, working on his laptop. Joe's cell phone rang. It was Toby, still back at the drive-in. What's your status, Toby asked. We're in place at the finish line, Joe replied. How are you feeling? I'm okay, Toby told him. Do you have the road locked down? Well, Benny is up there, or at least I think he is. Hold on. Joe pushed the button on his radio headset. Liar 1, he called into the mic. Are you standing by? Benny's distinctive voice came through the handset's tiny speaker. Not this again, he moaned. Why do you have to use that shitty handle? I wouldn't have to use it, Joe Peck told him, if you wouldn't just stop telling people you flew Apache helicopters when you were in the Army. I was a mechanic in Army aviation, Benny replied testily, and I once took an Apache for a joyride. That's all I ever said. This was an impressive boast, however, which is why the others in the Marshall Motors crew had their doubts about it. Oh, man, really? Okay.
Why,
Apaches were the most powerful combat helicopters in the world. An Apache was like a tank with a rotor spinning on top. They could carry hundreds of pounds of bombs, missiles, or rockets. Each one was also equipped with a massive gun, a weapon that could put some serious hurt on just about anything. An Apache could definitely ruin your day if you were on the wrong end of its weapon.
I can confirm that's probably true.
But it was not just what they were packing that made Apache so fierce. The copter could fly nearly 200 miles per hour, could do loops, rare for any helicopter, could stay aloft for hours, and in general could mimic a lot of maneuvers jet fighters were famous for doing. Only the cream of the Army's aviation crop were qualified to fly them. Again, while he was a great guy, Benny was known to exaggerate, and since he'd come back from the military, his tall tale seemed to have grown even taller. This was why his buds were skeptical about his claim to have gone joyriding in an Apache.
No, needed all the expansion.
Yeah. I know that's what you said, Joe Peck told him now. It's just that I don't believe you. Benny's exasperation came through loud and clear. Just because I was a copter crew chief doesn't mean that I don't know how to fly a helicopter, he said. All right, Liar 1, Joe Peck said, emphasizing the last two words. Whatever you say. Now please, what's the status? Benny was full of dubious claims, but at least one of them was true. He could fly an airplane. That's where he was now, inside a Cessna Skyhawk flying above the proposed race course. Well, okay, I'm going to tell you right now, I know what a Cessna Skyhawk is. My dad has flown them before. It's a very small airplane. They are probably going to spend at least 2 paragraphs describing that it's a small airplane. Let's find out if that's true. While the Cessna Skyhawk was definitely not an Apache, it did take some skill to fly one. It had a big engine, could fly more than 150 miles per hour, and at more than 3 miles and at more than 3 miles high. There was no adding to that sentence. Okay. While the Cessna was among the most popular airplanes ever built, only a pilot who knew what he was doing could fly one safely at night. I think you need to know what you're doing to fly any airplane, really. It being daylight does not mean that you can just fly.
I can fly any plane during the day. You know.
But at night?
At night, fuck, man, I don't even know.
Benny looked out over the controls of the Cessna, studying a small TV screen showing a night vision view of the racecourse below. If they can barely afford to keep the shop open, why do they own an airplane?
It's like $1 really sure to keep the shop open. Why are they spending all day on this iPad? It's already got ridiculous in this regard.
The race would be run on public streets, but the course itself wasn't strictly about driving fast on straightaways. Almost half the course would take the drivers down some of Mount Kisco's narrowest back alleys and side streets, places with lots of sharp corners and tight turns. How to get through this rat's maze quickly was part of the overall strategy and danger of the event. Benny's job up here was to be on the lookout for the police or civilian cars or any kind of vehicle that might get in the way of the race. This was critical, as the speed of the cars involved might go as high as 140 miles per hour. "It's looking good," Benny finally reported. "Looks like most of Mount Kisco has gone to bed." "Okay, Liar One," Joe Peck responded. "Hey, you got a death wish, Pecker?" Benny yelled at him. "My call sign is up. Got it? Call me Maverick, or what?" Joe asked, laughing. "Or I'll kamikaze this bird right into your nutsack," Benny replied.
You can be my wingman anytime.
I'm gonna take another drink.
Yeah.
To be fair, now that we're in interaction of characters, it's way easier reading. It doesn't read like Wikipedia copy.
Just 2 paragraphs ago, I was describing the experience of flying one of those small planes, so anytime it can slip back into it.
It's true. Eventually they're going to explain every object in this book, so it'll be fine.
Only if you can drive it.
Start of the race was just minutes away. Back at the drive-in, Toby pulled a wad of cash from his pocket and counted it quickly. $1,000. This was a lot of money for him. A mortgage on the garage, providing paychecks for his crew, ordering supplies and car parts, keeping electricity on. The $1,000 might have been put to better use.
Maintaining a plane.
But Toby had suddenly found himself in survivor mode. Just seconds before his father died, Toby had promised him he'd do anything and everything to keep Marshall Motors going. And so, desperate times called for desperate measures. He knew it was time for him to put his skills as a driver to better use than just getting a rush at 150 miles per hour.
Probably.
He knew it was time for him to keep his word to his father. I feel like spending this money on a race is way worse use than paying the bills for another couple weeks.
You've got to think of it in terms of the long game here.
He counted out the cash one more time and then joined the other racers in the circle near the race organizer's station. This was going to be a box race, a well-known event in underground racing circles. It was simple. A predetermined entrance fee was put into a box by each racer. Whoever won the race won the contents of the box. One of the race organizers was holding the box. Everybody knows the rule. There's no handicapping in this race and no set-out lengths. You'll leave from the standing start. First bumper to cross finish line wins. Toby thought about it for just one moment. Then he threw his money into the box. The other 4 racers did the same. They would be formidable opponents. Jimmy had his balls out GTO, and little Pete would be here driving his beautiful 68 Camaro with its 427 cubic inch Corvette engine. Wait, there's 2 people from the shop, including him here. So they're putting $3,000 into this race in hopes of winning 5. This is not a sound strategy.
Yeah, so they only win the money people put in. They're putting in the majority of the money. This is the stupidest idea.
Terrible.
No wonder, with this kind of business skills, no wonder their shop's closing. I'm sorry.
A cute girl named Jenny B would be driving a very sweet Porsche 944 coupe with a 3.1 liter, heavily modified 300 horsepower engine under its hood. A powerhouse for such a small car. And a guy named DJ would be driving a BMW 3.0 E9 with a 3.2 liter engine bumped up to 310 horsepower. Again, a lot of power for a tiny featherweight burner. Toby knew none of them would be a pushover. With the money in place, the race organizer handed Toby 5 playing cards. "You want to do the honors, Marshall?" he asked Toby. "Why not?" Toby replied, shrugging. The race was going to start with the cars lining up in 2-car rows. The selection of cards determined which of the racers would line up. Toby checked the playing cards. They were all clubs, from the ace to the 5 card. He held them face down and gave them a quick shuffle. "Okay," the race organizer asked the others. Everyone agree the cards are clean? They all nodded. "Okay, Jimmy," the race organizer said. "You pick first." Jimmy McIntosh selected a card. He turned it over to reveal the 2 of clubs. "Not bad," he said with a smile. Little Pete went next. He crossed fingers on both hands, seemed to say a quick prayer, and then he picked his card. It was
gonna
the
get a
ace.
bad card.
Got the ace.
Oh, he got
Yes,
the
spirits are with me. I'm pretty sure little Pete's gonna die before this is
Okay,
over.
okay, I'm getting that. Yeah, quite possibly.
Because little Pete had picked the ace and Jimmy had picked 2 cards, The 2 card, they would comprise the first row, 1, 2. Jenny
Wait.
B went next.
Do you think he's gonna even make it out of this prologue here?
I don't know, probably not. If you want to establish this guy isn't actually the villain, so maybe.
And
So, you know,
also,
it's a real good thing
obviously,
they got
to get
rid of
angst
all
in
the
their
trains in
relationship,
Paradise City,
he is
so I
what's
can
the
drive my
brother.
car across all
Yeah.
the old railroads.
he's
Jenny
dead.
B, Jenny B went next. She selected the 3 of clubs. Could be worse, she said. Now it was just DJ and Toby was not feeling the love.
Here on Crash
He
FM.
hoped closer to the front, but that was impossible now. DJ drew the 5 of clubs and his shoulders slumped badly. Toby didn't feel much better as that left him with the 4 card. In other words, he would start out in the second row next to Jenny B. He was better than being last like DJ, but not by much. By 1, in fact. It is by the least possible difference between rows, by 1.
At least I'm not that DJ guy. God.
I mean, they barely described him, so obviously he's not relevant. At least Jenny B's a girl. That's important.
She has a cute car.
Okay, that's done, the race organizer said. I suggest you get your cars quickly so we can get this bad boy up and running. Toby dialed Joe Peck while he was walking back to his car. 4th pick, he told Peck when he answered. Second row next to Jenny. Heard Joe groan on the other end. Where's Petey at? He asked Toby. Little son of a bitch picked the ace, Toby reported with dark humor. Well, at least it's still in the family, Peck replied. I know, Toby said, but it ain't his garage we're trying to save. Okay, you don't need me to tell you this, Joe consoled him, but you're just gonna have to pick your spots, bide your time, and then push in the dagger when you see the opportunity. During the rest of it, just stay cool. Roger that, Toby replied. Toby hung up, and Peck relayed the position news to Finn. Not a disaster, Finn said. He's overcome worse. Besides putting Toby's Gran Torino in the best condition ever, the Marshall's crew had also installed a video camera on its front bumper. Anything the cam saw would be beamed to Finn's fired-up laptop. This way, the crew would be able to see every move Toby made. It'd be like going on the ride with him.
That's so
Apparently, little Pete doesn't get this kind of treatment. He sucks.
Well, they're below the poverty line, so they can only afford one magic.
One
car.
video camera to a laptop.
Yeah.
Finn pushed a few keys on the laptop, and in an instant they were looking at the video image being transmitted live from the race's starting point back at the drive-in. After a few bouts of static, the signal locked in and the picture became extremely clear. It showed what was left of the crowd in the drive-in parking lot. Many of them were now heading for the finish line, as well as the ghostly images of nearby lights, flaring weirdly in the night. Once the visuals were set, Joe Peck once again activated his air-to-ground radio headset. He called Benny. Status? Joe yelled into the headset. Still all clear, was Benny's reply. No cops, no civilians, no one in the way at all. This was good. In races like this, it was always better for all concerned if the course was clean. Crews for the other 4 cars were nearby. Joe yelled to them, "Our eyes in the sky say it's all clear. Time to rock and roll." But suddenly Joe felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He turned to find Dino Brewster, of all people, standing behind him. It was as if he came out of nowhere. "Go away," Joel told him. "Not so fast, Joe," Dino replied. "We're all brothers here. Brothers of the wheel, right?"
Oh my god!
"I don't know anyone who'd want to be your brother," Joe shot back at him.
Boom!
But Dino just laughed. He pointed to Finn's laptop and the live feed from Toby's bumper cam. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. "Can't you afford one of your own?" Finn asked him bitterly. "Why are you bothering us?" Dino just shrugged. "I left my laptop in my other Mercedes, you know, the SL 550. At any other time, that would have been enough for either Finn or Joe to level Dino, or at least cuff him upside the head. But other things were happening here. This wasn't just another race. There were high stakes involved. If Toby didn't win, Marshall Motors, their home away from home for many years, would probably be no more. You know, probably. Maybe not. But probably.
West to the
Maybe
wind
people,
farm.
all the damage done from this, they'd have to start fixing it somehow. People would start.
Plus, the race was about to begin. So this was not a time to start a brawl. This was a time to pay attention to the big picture and to let the little things ride. With much reluctance, they let Dino watch the race with them. I think Dino sounds like a cool dude. I don't know. Hey, let me come and watch this race. Let's put it behind us. We've moved on. I'm out of high school. You guys should supposed to be out of high school.
Yeah, Dino's fine. As movie jerks go, he's not actually done anything jerkish yet.
I mean, like in backstory he has, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
People change. They're in their late 20s. Like, who's still holding on to that grudge?
So Toby
Apparently,
definitely is,
that's what happens when you don't move out of the small town you grew up in, I guess.
pretty much. Maybe
Back
that's
at
what
the
this is about. It's Toby's
back at-
sadness.
No, it is not. Back at the starting line, located on the road just outside the drive-in theater's entrance, Little Pete had expertly maneuvered his Camaro next to Jimmy McIntosh's goat, making up the Fox Race's front row. I don't know what a goat is.
It's a small animal.
Yeah, I know that. He's not riding a goat. This isn't Wacky Racers. It'd be better if it was.
If only.
They made that movie. It's called Speed Racer. It's pretty good.
It's better than this.
Jenny V slid her Porsche in side by side with Toby's Gran Torino, completing the second row. DJ's BMW 3.0 filled out a line in the third row. On the signal from the race organizers, the drivers began revving their engines. The sound quickly became deafening, like the roar of distant thunder. Exhaust smoke and blowing dust filled the night air. Each driver gave a thumbs up. They were all ready to go. Then the 5 drivers focused their attention on something off to the right. Their muscles became tense and unmoving. They were all hair-trigger nervous. For good reason. Off in the distance, a freight train was approaching. Its dull mechanical growl grew rapidly, the cry of its oncoming whistle cutting through the night. Suddenly, it came around the bend at Battery Hill. Its ultra-bright front light slashed into darkness. At the very moment its beam appeared, the combined revving of the 5 engines hit its peak. Then, tires began to spin. More smoke rose into the air. The noise decibels reached the maximum. One of the race workers dropped the handkerchief, and all 5 cars suddenly exploded off the line. Little Pete had the best start. It was almost too good. His Camaro shot into the first right-hand turn, reaching it way before anyone else. But he took this corner too aggressively, drifting much further out than he wanted and almost spinning into the ditch. There was only a slight delay, but even a moment's loss could be costly in these types of races. As proof, Pete's miscue allowed Jimmy McIntosh to get the inside line. Jimmy laid on the gas and quickly gained a lot of ground on Little Pete. Meanwhile, just 2 seconds behind, Toby, Jenny B, and DJ drifted violently around the first crucial corner as well, but with a little more control. A short downhill straightaway lay ahead. Beyond that was a railroad crossing. My biggest problem with the writing in this book, other than the fact that it's stupid, is all these weird vague terms like the a little bit and maybe and probably like are everywhere. It's just really sloppy.
Yeah, no, it's he's a little bit behind it. Watch out.
A mile to the north of the race's starting line, CSX freight train number 12, traveling from Wausau, New York to Oak Point Terminal in the Bronx, was running right on schedule. The train consisted of 32 freight cars being pulled by 2 massive diesel locomotives, each boasting 4,000 horsepower. The number 12 was traveling at 55 miles per hour at the moment, its average speed, and was due at the Bronx at 12:35.
Sometimes you have a workout to meet. Sometimes you have to meet a workout, and there's no other way, okay?
As it cleared Battery Hill, it reduced its speed to 45 miles per hour, but only temporarily. After the bend, there was a gradual decline that ran for several miles. I've done calculus problems that sound like this.
I don't know. You were complaining about how vague it is. I think that was a little too specific there. Bring back.
It's not over. It's not over. Once the train
God.
reached this stretch of track, its speed would increase to 65 miles per hour, its fastest for the entire 82-mile trip. As running trains was all about staying on time, this increase in speed built into number 12's thrice-weekly schedule. So just like every other time this midnight train passed through Mount Kisco, it was due to cross the open road intersection at Chase Avenue, arriving there at precisely 12:05 a.m. The railroad crossing was only a mile from the Mount Kisco Drive-In, near the end of appropriately named Railroad Street. The crossing had many warning lights and an alarm bell that rang to high heaven whenever a train was approaching. I feel like putting a train like crossing right next to a movie theater is really dumb, especially when it's a drive-in. Like, why would you do that?
I assume the train came first. So why would you build a movie theater?
Why would you put the thing there? It's a mile away. You can hear a train way further away than just a mile.
Yeah. Especially if it's freight trains going past all the time. This is dumb.
That's Thrice Weekly.
Yes, thrice weekly. Thrice weekly schedule.
The crossing had many warning lights and an alarm bell that rang to high heaven whenever a train was approaching. It also had a standard St. Andrew's caution sign on a high pole looking over it, and a street-level sign that advised all to look both ways. What would you have preferred? Sorry.
I would have preferred if it just said it sped up a little bit. I would have preferred that than the precise description.
The math problem of this train. It was literally 4 paragraphs to describe the train is going to cross the track at 12:05, and they knew this.
This is making me feel a lot better about the stuff I'm trying to write. I should just get it done. Because Jesus Christ. Whew! Man.
But Chase Avenue was a passive crossing. It had no crossing gates. It was located in such an isolated spot on such a little-used road, right next to the movie theater. The New York Transportation Department had long ago deemed crossing gates unnecessary. At 12:04, the crossing came alive, its red lights began flashing, and the warning bell began ringing madly, but none of the 5 racers, now just a quarter-mile away, lifted off their accelerations when the commotion began. Just the opposite. They were all heading as fast as they could toward the railroad crossing. This is going to be the first, 5 minutes of this movie. You know that, right?
No,
We're reading...
The first 5 minutes is the scene that just races being races.
You know,
And
when
then
you
it cuts
did
the
that crash
credits,
and have in your
and
car,
then
they gave you
it
a
pans
compass
across the
and a
rule
map,
of
but it's up to you to learn how to use
mechanics
them.
as
So
they
go
have their
explore.
discussion.
That's
All you gotta
true,
do is drive
okay.
past a point
So,
of
but
interest
in the
and
first
add it to
20...
the map.
Yeah, this is
Check it now.
23
And if
minutes in.
there's
This is
space
the
on
first
there,
turning point.
drive
of
over
the
to it
script.
and see what you can
As
discover.
Sinfield would call
This
it.
is Atomica.
Because this is that movie, exactly. To the dot.
Not unlike Toby's Gran Torino, the train crew had a video camera attached to the front of their locomotive. Unlike Toby's bumper cam, though, the train's video setup was equipped with infrared night vision capability, allowing the train crew to see any unusual heat sources that might be looming in their path for up to a mile away. And at that moment, the train crew could see 5 extremely bright blobs of heat traveling at high speed down Railroad Street, heading right for the crossing. "Those punks!" the engineer cried. "Not again!" Suddenly, the night was cut by a sound that drowned out even the roar of the 5 race car engines. It was CSX number 12 blowing its collision horn. The train crew had seen this type of thing before. Crazy kids in souped-up cars playing chicken with their train. They knew how insanely dangerous it was. That's why they were laying on the emergency horn so long and loud, even as the race cars were just seconds away from reaching the crossing. But the horn had no effect. None of the racers showed any signs of slowing down. If anything, they were trying to go faster. Just a second. Little Pete's Camaro was the first to streak across the railroad crossing. He hit the raised track bed so hard and so fast he went airborne for a few long seconds. Then he came down just as violently as he went up, crashing back to the asphalt roadway. But his extra heavy-duty shocks cushioned the blow just as advertised, and he was unharmed. Pete shifted down just one level to get back some of the speed he lost while in flight, and then booted it up again. He was soon back up to 110 miles per hour and was still solidly in first place. Telling everyone speeds is maybe the worst part of this book, actually.
So, and this might take. If you had to write this scene in a novel form, how would you do it then? That's an interesting question. If you had to write.
Okay, so the train comes by every week, right? So and they know when it's happening. The conductors know that they're street racers. It's a street racing culture. Nobody's surprised by this. It's not like an actual danger unless something bad happens. But nothing bad's gonna happen because it's the beginning of the book. So you just put your head inside one of the racers. They all know it's going to happen,
Yep.
and they drive past it, and it's cool. And they admit that, hey, that's pretty cool. It's a great thrill every time we do it. But nobody ever actually gets hurt. It takes a page.
Someone's gonna get hit by that train. If someone doesn't
Yeah,
get hit by that
probably.
train,
This is Chekhov's train, but at the same time, like your first time, it should be not a big deal. Not 4 pages of setup about what they're doing.
wait,
I knew what they were doing immediately because I've seen a movie before.
yeah, man, this is even worse than I was expecting. This is okay. Let's complete this fucking chapter. Jesus Christ, end this race already.
But in these kinds of races, being solidly in first place was just a matter of inches. Jimmy McIntosh's GTO had been right on Pete's bumper when Pete went flying over the tracks, and by mimicking Pete's maneuver, Jimmy went airborne too. He landed just as Pete had, hard and fast, bottoming out a bit, but causing nothing more than a brief storm of sparks before regaining form. Pushing his pedal to the floor, he reclaimed his solid second position in an instant, gluing himself to Pete's ass. Just seconds behind them were Jackie and Toby. They were neck and neck as they approached the railroad crossing, traveling side by side in excess of 100 miles per hour. But Toby was in dead man's slot. He was the closest to an oncoming train, and if something went wrong, it would hit him first. As if that's going to help Jenny. She's going to be mowed down too. The locomotive's extremely bright headlight blinded him as he filled up the interior of the Gran Torino. It was like the sun itself was coming through the passenger's window. But there was no turning back now, and Toby knew it. There was no way he could stop in time, no way he could swerve out of the way. He had to either beat the train or get crushed by it. He roared across the raised tracks, and a heartbeat later, Jenny B going over just an instant before him. Both of them went airborne. Though she was a hair's breadth in front of him, had the train hit Toby, she would have been killed an instant later as well. Well, thank you, book, for addressing this. But none of that happened. They both cleared the tracks, and the rush that went through Toby's body was like nothing he'd ever felt before. He'd never been that close to being killed in a race or anywhere else. He'd come within mere inches of being obliterated by the train, but in this race within a race, car versus locomotive, he'd won. He and Jenny hit the pavement at the same time, creating a twin storm of smoke and sparks. At that moment, Toby looked over at her, his face lit by the sparks they'd both just created. He was surprised to see her glancing back at him, the same look of exhilaration and relief on her face that he was sure was on his. Their twin expressions said it all. This is why we race. Now this is pod racing.
I don't know, this seems to be setting up I'm not even going to go there. Carry on.
DJ was still in last place, though. Doomed by his poor placement at the start, he knew as soon as he saw the first 4 racers go over the crossing, there was no way he would make it in time. Everything happens fast while traveling at 110 miles per hour, sometimes faster than the human brain could process. DJ was just 20 feet away from the railroad crossing when CSX number 12 reached it. Its emergency horn was still blaring, yet
no!
DJ was still heading straight for it, seconds away from colliding with it.
No!
He pulled on his emergency brake, instantly locking his brakes, but this was not enough.
No!
He was still going fast to avoid disaster. In the next instant, he turned the BMW's wheel violently to the right, propelling him into a ragged drift, which, among a lot of smoke and dust, put him driver's side first of the train, not where he wanted to be. Desperate, he put both feet on the brakes and went into a full skid. He turned the wheel violently again, this time to the left, causing him to drift wildly in the other direction. He turned 180 degrees and came to a stop so close to the crossings that his side mirror was hit by the passing train. The mirror exploded into the driver's window, sending shattered glass all over him. This all happened in just 3 seconds, and the first thing DJ did was check his crotch. It was not wet, thank God, not even a little moist. He was out of the race and out $1,000, but at least he was alive and dry.
Up until him talking about his pig, there was almost a genuine good bit of, oh, there's actual tension here. I don't know whether DJ's going to make it. And he thinks, maybe I'll talk about DJ's crotch. Ba-ba.
Now there were just 4, and they were racing practically 2 by 2, bumper to bumper down the rest of Railroad Street. They came to a sharp corner. Little Pete and Jimmy went into a drift side by side, but Jimmy's GTO got wobbly as his outside wheels hit the dirt. He tried to correct the problem, but he was forced to dive right. Cars were parked on the shoulder of the road, and he was just seconds away from smashing into them. Toby and Jenny B saw what was happening and tried to take advantage of the situation. With Jimmy in trouble, they both powered themselves around the corner at the same moment, almost making it 3 wide, but Jimmy was a great driver. He quickly recovered and was back up on the street in a flash. He immediately split between Jenny B and Toby. Man, this is all falling apart. Almost smashing Toby's right front quarter panel in the process. Toby shook his head in frustration. Jenny B had managed to get ahead of Toby and claim second place, but Jimmy's astute driving had not only shut the door on Toby, it had pushed him back into 4th place. But Toby had a plan. He knew there was a tight turn up ahead. It was a hard corner to the right that went through a small concrete tunnel, followed by an immediate left. Toby strategically moved wide, putting himself on the outside in a good place to take the first sharp corner. Then he waited. Still in the lead, little Pete drifted through the turn with precision. Jenny B was now right behind him, but as she entered the right-hand turn, Jimmy's presence right on her bumper forced her to overdrift. She lost control for a moment, bouncing her car off some debris that had been stacked at the tunnel's entrance. This slowed down Jenny B just enough to let Jimmy move back into 2nd place. Meanwhile, his plan foiled. Toby had been forced to break through the tunnel to avoid the falling trash. When the smoke cleared, he was still in 4th place and unable to make up any ground. The 4 cars jumped onto Route 16, a straight narrow highway, and finally opened up their engines for some real high-speed driving. All 4 were soon whirring along at 140 miles per hour plus. They blew through a desolate intersection like they were all moving at the speed of sound. That's not the speed of sound. They came to an underpass just microseconds separating them. Each car rocketed through it, closing in on 145 miles per hour. Beyond them was now the small, quiet city of Mount Kisco. But then trouble came. At that moment, up in the Cessna, Benny had spotted something. He quickly clicked his microphone on. "Be advised," he said, "I have traffic ahead. Repeat, I've got traffic ahead." Yes? It's a break right now.
I thought this book had already established in its parlance that, like the speed of sound was the unattainable speed of 250 miles an hour. The metaphor had already been set. The lack of consistency here, it's... Come on.
I like that they said 140 miles per hour plus, and then literally 2 sentences later say they closing in on 145 miles per hour. That plus is a very small number, obviously.
42
Plus,
miles
like,
an hour.
Yeah, 2 or 3, not more than that, really. Still on the highway, the 4 drivers were approaching a wide intersection when Toby got Benny's call. They were still going close to 150 miles per hour, and it was then that they saw the first signs of life. There were a few civilian cars driving about, creating some light traffic on the highway. This didn't concern Jimmy or Little Pete. They blasted by the cars like they were standing still, drifting wildly and going through the next intersection sideways. Jenny B was not so lucky. She had to swerve to avoid one of the civilian cars and began spinning out. This was the opportunity Toby had been waiting for. He hit the gas and threaded the needle between Jenny B and a civilian car. And just like that, he was in third place, leaving Jenny B behind. Waiting at the finish line, Finn was following the race on his laptop. Joe Peck was watching over his shoulder. So was Dino. They'd watched the bumper cam footage image of Toby drifting through the potentially dangerous intersection and then accelerating madly into third place. That's a close one, Dino said. He got lucky there. That's not luck, Joe Peck shot back. Our boy Toby is patient. He waits for his moments. Toby was always in total control, and Finn and Joe knew it. But Dino only laughed. Sure thing, guys, he said snidely. It was 10 past midnight, and the streets of downtown Mount Kisco were deserted, but not for long.
This isn't making me physically angry at how this is not all inside Toby's... Like, why would you write this as the boring descriptive thing? Why? Why are you doing this?
The incoming race car sounded like a formation of jet airplanes approaching. The thunderous noise was soon echoing off the locked-up buildings of the sleepy downtown. With Jenny B crapped out, there were only 3 racers left. Jimmy was down the lead. Little Pete was right on his bumper. Very close behind was Toby. This was where the race changed radically. Gone were the straightaways. Now the route brought them through a warren of back alleys and narrow streets in the older part of the tiny city. All 3 of them loudly drifted into the first alley, the cacophony of screeching tires reaching new dimensions. The alley behind Main Street was narrow, and once in, there was no way to pass. At this point, it was more like driving through an obstacle course than a race, but all 3 drivers handled it expertly. A second later, they bounced out of the alley, roaring across Boltis Street into the next alley beyond. Sparks were flying everywhere, their undercarriages were tearing up the old asphalt pavement, but none of the 3 dared slow down. Out of the second alley, they came to a hard left turn onto St. Mark's Place. Though it was not much wider than the alley, all 3 were screaming down it in seconds, topping 100 miles per hour. Little Pete was able to regain the lead coming out of St. Mark's Place. Jimmy fell behind because he drifted too wide, but was still a close second, with Toby right behind him in third. This was okay. Toby's reputation was one of patience and opportunity. His talent was knowing when to make a move, and his genius was not stressing about it if that move failed, because more chances were always right around the corner. And at that moment, rocketing down that side street, Toby decided to make a move. He mashed his accelerator, and an instant later almost collided with Little Pete while trying to outflank Jimmy. An instant after that, they all slid sideways into the entrance of a place called I-Beam Alley. All 3 of them did a violent drift, which evolved into doing a U-turn while screaming past a huge parking structure. Pete was driving in such a way that he almost able to control Jimmy's steering, counting him move by move. But by doing that, Pete was also preventing Toby from getting around both of them. It was highly successful and very ballsy driving for the little guy. As a result, they left I-Beam Alley in the same position as they went in. Now they were back out on a somewhat wider thoroughfare, this one called Spring Street. From here, they accelerated towards a statue located in the center of town square, that of Chief Kisco. All 3 of them drifted around the statue into a right U-turn, but Jimmy had gained the prime lane. He hit the gas and in a burst of power was able to sneak in front of Pete. Again, the noise was either awesome or blood-curdling, depending on your point of view. But once around the statue, they headed to the 2-lane Route 117 beyond it. All 3 at the point in the race Toby had been waiting for, time to make another move. He jerked his steering wheel sharply and dove into the right-hand lane. His main objective was to get past Little Pete, and he was able to do it when up ahead a very slow-moving street sweeper filled Toby's field of vision. It was completely blocking his path. There was only one thing he could do. He redlined his RPMs, upshifted, and then dropped the hammer just shy of the max. I don't even know what that means.
He dropped the hammer shy of the max.
In an instant, he closed the gap between Little Pete and the street sweeper. Then he counted down 3, 2, 1. At the very last moment, Toby floored it, shot in front of Little Pete, and screeched back into the left-hand lane all in one smooth motion. Just like that, he was in second place. He took a moment to look in his rearview mirror. Little Pete was now right on his trail, furious that Toby had so expertly jinked him, especially after Jimmy had done the same thing to him just moments before. Sorry, little buddy, Toby called out with a smile. Them's the breaks. Toby's a jerk.
Toby is such a jerk.
A few seconds passed, then all 3 screeched into another alley, this one off Moore Avenue. They were back in the rat's maze at top speed, but Jimmy hit his gas a little too hard and sideswiped a brick building just a few feet down from the alley's entrance. This slowed him just enough for Toby to get right on his bumper. Okay, if I was writing this book, because obviously none of this stuff's going to make it in the movie, I would name all the streets out of, like, drivers from, like, movies or real life, just like Silent Hill names them all after horror authors. Like, all their street names are, like, King and, like, Coots and stuff like that. Why wouldn't they do that?
This guy doesn't give a shit.
But that's how you care about doing something that people will enjoy.
That has already been... No, that would never... I mean, maybe someone, if you gave it to someone who was, you know, actually was like, well, maybe this would be fun in a dumb way. But alas...
Like, where's Callahan Street? Where's Callahan Street?
I don't know.
Where's Atomica Lane?
Oh!
Survive the
Yes,
drive
no,
northeast to the
I
Coast Guard
regret
HQ.
them not giving me the chance to write this novel.
Where's Zoe Bell Memorial Highway?
I would just have a bunch of references to Fast and Furious though, and they would get really cross with it.
I mean, that'd be cool. Han Circle.
Is it also his Need for Speed? There's not a single person referenced freaking Neon and that The Doors song. All I know is that The Doors song. That Need for Speed.
Toby felt like he was moving at warp speed inside the alley, and up ahead he knew it would begin to widen. Time for another move. He jerked his wheel violently to the left, taking the outside lane, hoping to start his turn outside the alley early, and thus gain even more on Jimmy. 3 cars shot out of the alley a few seconds later, screeching left onto Woodland Avenue, which was a one-way street. Toby's maneuver had worked. He'd gained the inner lane and was now in good position to try for the lead. But coming out of nowhere, he saw a homeless man who was pushing a shopping cart step off the curb and right into his path. This is the Save the Cat moment, by the way.
Right here.
Because in the middle of illegal street racing, he neglects to run over this homeless man, thus he's the good guy.
Ending a vanquish point right here.
Toby was boxed in so tight by Jimmy he had no other choice but to drive right into the shopping cart. The cart exploded into a million pieces as he hit it, sending debris up and over his car, seeing the remains of the shopping cart flying through the air. Little Pete swerved at the last possible moment, barely missing the rain of rags and junk. That was way too close, Toby thought. He screamed to his radio, "Benny!" Benny replied just as quickly. "I saw you had it, bro," he said. "No worries." 3 cars drifted loudly left onto Poplar Street, only to find a civilian car in the oncoming lane heading right at them. Toby took the opportunity to inch just a little closer to Jimmy's bumper, leaving Little Pete behind. This position allowed Toby to draft off Jimmy as they started to pass the approaching car together. Once again, Toby decided to make a move. Once past the civilian car, he swung into the wrong side of the road. He was now down in 3rd gear. His engine was screaming. He shifted up to 4th. The engine screamed again, but the move served to slingshot him around Jimmy's left bumper. Toby buried his accelerator and was instantly neck and neck with the GTO. Suddenly, they were approaching the arched underpass, the finish line lit by flares. This was it. The underpass went by in a blur. Toby poured on everything he had. Just as they exited the overpass, he did a quick look to the left and saw the grill of Jimmy's car knocked 6 inches behind him. A second after that, it was over. Toby had won. But there was no time for celebration as Benny was suddenly screaming into his radio, "Donut Convention!" His warning needed no translation, but Finn provided one anyway. "Cops!" he yelled. On that word, the racers, their cars, and their crews simply vanished. When, a few moments later, a police car arrived at the finish line, siren blaring, lights flashing, the only things left were a few burnt-out but still smoking flares.
That's the end.
We only got 10 more pages. I'm actually feeling better about this. Let's push on to the end of part 1.
Was that the end of the chapter?
Yeah, if you're still up for it.
No, but was that was the end of the chapter? He just
Yeah,
won,
that was the end of chapter 2.
he just won the race.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I assumed something was actually going to happen in that chapter. I was proven
No,
wrong.
of course not.
Sorry.
We've got a lot of book left, dude.
Wow. Okay, I thought he had to lose there so that sets off the actual story. Turns out I was incorrect.
If we were both writing this and doing it the proper way, that's how that would end.
Yeah.
Or begin. That's how Fast and Furious begins. Brian loses his car and he owes Vin Diesel one.
He loses the race.
That's how
and he is
Tokyo
sent
Drift
to Tokyo.
begins. He wrecks his car and owes Han a car. That's how this is supposed to work.
This is 2 races where no one has lost because they're just too much better than the cops, man. So, I don't know who's writing the shit, but they haven't watched enough dumb car movies, that's for sure. Let's
3.
Okay, let's do this.
Yeah, we got 10 more pages. That's fine. I'm actually enjoying this more now that things are starting to happen that are dumb.
That is for sure. Oh, I've read the first line of this. Here's the things about to happen.
The sounds of beer cans being popped and loud hip-hop music filled the night air around Marshall Motors' garage.
Yep.
The race had been over for hours, but the crew was still talking about it, reliving it turn by turn. Joe Peck and Finn were especially excited when telling their version of events, as seen through the Gran Torino's bumper cam. As they talked while the Budweiser flowed, it was almost as if they'd been behind the wheel instead of Toby. Toby and little Pete listened to it all with good humor. They were standing side by side, as was usually the case. Toby was Pete's idol, and Pete really was like a little brother to him.
Pete is so
I thought
dead.
you were going to catch him
Pete
for sure.
is so fucking
Toby told
dead.
Toby told Pete as he counted his $5,000 winnings again, one wrinkled bill at a time. You should give 1,000 that to Pete, who put it up.
Yeah, I thought you were a team.
He had him in the turns, but he's a hell of a driver, little Pete replied, draining his beer, and so are you, and I'll get you both next time. It went on like this for a while, but Toby was waiting for the right moment to steal away. Finally, he told the others he had to take a leak. He walked into the far corner of the garage and looked up into the night. Apparently he's peeing in the corner of the garage. I don't know.
I like the way it's like he couldn't find a way out. He just said he needed the loo. It's not hard. It's not an advanced escape maneuver there.
What's this guy doing in the corner? I thought he said to pee. Oh,
He's just looking up at the
Toby,
sky.
not there.
Down, Toby. Down, boy.
He was finally breathing normally again, his heart rate back where it should be. He'd been in street races before, but nothing as intense as this one. Maybe it was because there'd been so much at stake this time.
Maybe.
$5,000 would help. But he knew it was just a band-aid, a way to keep the wolves away from his door, but only for a short while.
Being ridiculous bumper cams, then.
Then what? The bills would not stop. The bank would still want its money, and he could expect his crew to work. And he couldn't expect his crew to work for free. He had to think of some other way to get income. Out of the garage would be history. Little Pete just gave you $1,000. I think they're fine.
Basically, he couldn't ask them to work for free, but he could ask them to work for money and then take their money later.
Wait, if Little Pete had won, would he have just taken the money and been like, "Fuck you guys, I'm going. I'm getting out of town."
Basically, I think that's what it's implying.
He was a good driver, but he was stuck in the minor leagues. $5,000 box races were rare in his area. If he wanted to get it on the others, he'd have to go to Chicago, Miami, or LA, hotbeds for these types of things. The cost of traveling around so much would take away a big chunk of whatever he won, and maybe he wouldn't win all the time, or at all. How would the garage stay running if he was gone for long periods of time? There was only one solution he could think of. He had to move up to the major leagues somehow, play with the big boys, the guys who were getting shots in Monarchs De Leon. Trouble was, he couldn't do that in his Gran Torino. He would need to have a real supercar, or at least drive for someone who owned one. He knew Monarch had been right on the money earlier that evening. He got a hold of a good car. Maybe the De Leon wasn't so out of the question. But until then, he was stuck down here in the bushes. He looked out over the town skyline. All was quiet again in Mount Kisco. He could just barely see the outline of Pride Rock against the starry sky. He wondered how many happy drunk kids were still up there, stumbling around in the dark, as he had done many times in the
Having their
past.
first
He hadn't been
sex.
up there in years. Like it or not, it was a place that belonged to the memories of his early youth. Besides, he could never think about it without thinking of Anita. She looked so beautiful earlier at the drive-in. He missed her terribly. They were two different people on different trajectories, different paths, but damn, he loved being with her. He'd always carried a quiet confidence about him, a trait inherited from his father. And while he knew his decisions might not always have been right, at least he knew that he'd thought carefully about anything important before he proceeded, except when it came to Anita. The more that time went on, the more he'd become convinced that he might have really blown that one. He walked back to the garage, grabbed another beer from the cooler, and fell back into the never-ending bullshit session about the race. Suddenly, a noise from outside distracted them. Finn got up and looked out the window. "You've got to be shitting me," he said. "What the fuck is he doing here?" "Who?" Peck asked. "This is a rated PG-13 movie, I'm pretty sure." There've already been like 3 fucks.
Must have originally been R-rated movie screenplay.
"How many assholes do you know that drive a Mercedes SLR?" Finn asked. "All of them," Peck replied in perfect deadpan.
Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.
"Oh yeah." "Oh yeah," Finn replied, and then said, "Then how many of them are named Dino?" "Probably a reasonable amount, actually, thinking about it." They heard the car pull up a moment later, through the bay window. Didn't they just say a noise distracted them, and now they've heard the car pull up?
Stop thinking.
Through the bay door windows, they could see what was in fact Dino's Mercedes SLR. No one said a word. They watched as Dino got out of the car.
I hope Dino says something like,
Go ahead.
Hey guys, I hope you're having a party here. What's going on? Just something really polite, and then they're like, fuck you, Dino.
They watched as Dino got out of the car and looked around the outside of the garage, sniffing at the grease and grime. Then he headed to the
Race
open bay
west
door.
to the wind
As
farm.
one, the crew stood up and formed a united front at the threshold. There was no way they wanted Dino to enter the garage itself. This was their turf. Dino spotted them and immediately stopped in his tracks. He looked at little Pete. That was nice driving out there, short stuff, he said, sucking up. I'm impressed. But little Pete just laughed at him. You hear that, Toby? He said. Dino Brewster's impressed with me. I can die happy now, I guess. Toby glared at Dino.
I'm waiting for him to do a thing that can't be taken with sincerity, and so far he's just complimented a dude. So
Dino smiled thinly, and there's Mr. Toby Marshall, he said, the man to beat in Mount Kisco. Toby looked him up and down, but still said nothing. Sorry about your old man, Dino went on in a very patronizing fashion. I know you two were close. Finally, Toby spoke. Are you lost or something, Dino? Dino had to think a moment. What do you mean? He asked. You haven't been around here in a long time, Toby told him acidly. Figured you must be lost. Toby took a step toward Dino to emphasize his words and to make one thing clear. He was not wanted around here. So nothing's changed then, Toby, Dino asked him. Even after 10 years, you still just want to pick up some locker room fight? But Toby wasn't really looking at Dino. He was looking at the Mercedes, searching for any sign of Anita. She's at her folks, Dino told him, reading his mind. This has nothing to do with her. Toby felt his shoulders droop, but at least she wasn't with Dino. What do you want here, Dino? Toby flatly asked him. We're busy here. It's simple, Dino said. I want to see you build a real car. Toby waved him off. I got plenty of cars to build. Dino took a look around the rough-edged garage. Yeah, well, how's that been working out for you lately? Toby gave him a hard look. Dino shrugged. Listen, Toby, I didn't come here to insult you, he said, a bit of his attitude seeming to disappear. He's had no attitude!
he said hello.
None!
He's asked how are you doing. He said I'm sorry about your dad. What has he done wrong?
He specifically said, I don't want to pick up the same dumb fight we had when we were kids because we're adults now.
This is a way more better way to read this film. If Dino's just a guy trying to put stuff behind him and see if this guy's grown up yet. Which he has not.
I came here to make you a business proposition, something that could be a game changer for you. You handing out dreams now, Dino? Little Pete scoffed at him. How much is this going to cost us? Dino ignored him. He looked around the garage again. I've seen 100 custom racing shops since I left this town, he said to Toby, but I still haven't seen work as good as yours. The garage crew was silent. None of them knew what to make of Dino's compliment. That's all the work of these guys, Toby said, pointing at the others. That's not me. Dino took a breath. Let me get right to the point, he said. I've got a very special car that needs to be finished. What kind of car are we talking about? Joe Peck asked. Ford Mustang, Dino replied. A Mustang, Joe said. There's only about 1 million of them out there. But not like this one, Dino told him. It's the last Mustang Ford and Carroll Shelby were building before Carroll died. Suddenly everyone in the crew was paying rapt attention. Carroll Shelby was not only a rock star in the world of customized cars, he was considered the godfather of street racing. To say he was an automotive genius was like saying the sky was blue or the sun was hot. Invoking his name was no little matter. Thousands of people want to put their hands on a car like that, Toby said. How did you get it? You steal it? Dino ignored the insult. Mr. Shelby and my uncle were close friends, he explained. He waited a moment, then continued. Here's the proposition. If you finish building that Mustang like you rebuilt your Gran Torino, I'll give you a quarter of what I get when I sell it. Little Pete exploded. A quarter, he exclaimed. You cheap bastard. It's done right. The car will be worth $2 million minimum, Dino shot back. That'll be $500,000 in your pocket. The crew fell stone silent. That kind of money had never been anywhere within their reach before. Dino and Toby just stared at each other. There's a lot of history between them, all of it bad. Where was all this going? Dino broke the silence. I look around here and I see a ton of talent and no opportunity, he told them. Face it, you guys are dying here. I mean, it's obvious. So just forget everything that's happened between us. That's ancient history. I'm here to make peace and money for all of us. Toby's crew exchanged worried looks. Each one knew this was wrong. Trading with the enemy. The uneasy silence could have been cut with a knife. Dino went on. Look, don't answer me now, Toby, he said. Just think about it. As Dino turned to leave, Toby looked back at his crew. He already knew their opinion on this. But then Toby just shook his head. I don't need to think about it, he said suddenly. I'll do it. A gasp came up from the others. Dino smiled. I'll have it here tomorrow, he told Toby. There was no handshake, no goodbye. But Toby and Dino exchanged a brief look of non-hostility, if not respect. Then Dino got back into his Mercedes and drove away. Someone turned off the music. The beer cooler was closed. An angry silence now enveloped the garage. Benny finally broke the spell. I have one question for you, boss, he said to Toby. You lost your fucking mind? You're going to work for Dino Brewster? Joe Peck stood up. He was the oldest one among them, their elder statesman. Yeah, what the hell, Toby, he asked. You don't want anything to do with that asshole. He's a bad guy, Finn added, and he's always been a bad guy. Benny spoke again. We don't need that jackass, boss, he said. This is about Anita and getting her back. Do it a different way, homie. Write a poem or some shit. Dear Anita, nothing is sweeter than Anita. I really Anita. Benny is freestyle rapping again. This movie is racist.
Yep.
The crew laughed, all except Toby, but Finn pushed on. Forget Dino, urged Toby. Tell him you're out. We're doing fine here without him. But we're not, Toby said, stunning them. We're not doing fine. The crew was very surprised to hear this, except Joe Peck. The conversation he'd heard earlier suddenly made sense. Well, many people are hurting, Toby, Finn said. You know things have changed in this town. It's a tough economy for everyone, or mostly everyone. Toby thought for a moment. Look, I'm way behind on the loan, he finally told them. The guy from the bank was here today. Ask Joe, he saw him. Joe Peck could only nod and stare at the floor. They're going to shut us down, Toby went on. It's as simple as that. This is a crushing blow for them all to hear. They loved the garage and everything that went with it. Little Pete spoke up. Look, I hate Dino as much as anyone else here, but if what you're saying is that we need to work with him to save this place, then I'm with you, Toby. But Finn still disagreed. You just made $5,000 tonight, Toby, he said. You're not completely broke. That's gotta be good enough to make your loan payment, Joe Peck added. What happens next month, Toby asked them, and the month after that? I can't expect to win all these dinky races. Even if I did, it still wouldn't be enough. You're the business major, Finn. You know what I'm talking about. It's a question of dollars and cents, and a steady flow of income, and we just aren't getting that anymore. This was serious, and they could all feel it. Here's the bottom line, Toby told them. If we don't do this, then this place is gone. He looked at each one for a long time. Anyone here up for that, he asked. No one said a word. The next day, a flatbed truck pulled up to the front of Marshall Motors. Behind the wheel was an individual appropriately named Big Al. Obese and sweaty, he was Dino's right-hand man. He backed the truck up to the garage's main door. On the back was a car that looked vaguely like a Mustang, but it was sitting on blocks and missing many of its key components. It was far from being a completed car. It was instead of such a state of disarray, it took a while just to get it off the flatbed and into the garage. But once it was done, the doors of the garage were closed behind it, and from that point on, Marshall Motors would never be the same again.
Right.
End of part 1.
First off,
Please turn over the tape to begin part 2.
First off, calling bullshit on having a characters called both Little Pete and Big Al. Fuck off. 2. In my
And
mind,
neither of them are. One of them should have been ironic at least if you're going to go for that.
You can't. A second, in my mind, I see a conversation between Dino and Anina where he's like, "I've got this car. I need to get it fixed up. It's really in a bad shape. Who do you know that can do this? I need help with it." He's like, I used to go out with a guy in high school. You know, one of his favorites. Oh yeah, I'm sure he'll be over it now. Just take it to him. And he's like, "Oh, good point. Maybe that is a good idea." And they go back, and he's just greeted with
He was probably like, well, I don't know. I mean, we had bad blood. Let's go and visit and see what he's still doing. And if his car's running good, then I'll do it. Because it's kind of a big risk to take on someone I don't really know anymore. And so they go and they do it. And he's like, oh, well, obviously this guy knows what he's doing. He's got a great car. I trust him to do this job. It's a big deal. And then he hands him this job, and the guy's like, fuck you. You suck. I hate you.
Yeah, what the like?
Man.
He's done nothing actually wrong yet, which. Amazing. I assume in the movie this will all be played completely straight and he'll be the bad guy. I mean, it's being played.
Well, I'm sure it'll probably be a guy who can't act, so he'll just be like sneering and gross and not selling it as genuine. Because if you sell it as genuine, it's hilarious.
It would be so good if they actually got someone who knew enough what they were doing to sell that as completely genuine. So, oh yeah, no, hey, how's your dad? I'm sorry, I knew you were close. It's yeah.
Oh, Dino is being played by Dominic Cooper, so that's great.
Great. I mean, he's gonna go sneery as all hell, but if he didn't, then this might be the best movie. I don't know.
Yeah.
Was Toby going to end this movie getting together with Jenny B? Is that where this is going? It's not.
No,
No.
of course not.
Because they had that moment when racing where Toby realised, oh, I'm a racer. That was weird. God, this is a terrible book.
Benny, by the way, is played by Kid Cudi, so of course it's going to be racist. Just get the rapper to play the goofy black guy.
And his quirk.
I mean, to be fair, it worked for Too Fast, Too Furious, but
It did work for Too Fast, Too Furious, but it's more any stuff with Tyrese that you remember is from the later ones.
It's
So-
road rage. Beat
no,
the
that's not.
takedown target
He,
for the win.
Tyrese was eating and not wearing sleeves from the beginning.
Oh yeah, but he didn't have any lines. He was just eating non-stop, just shoveling stuff into his mouth.
And
without-
Jarul was in that one. Or Jarul was in the first one, right?
I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah,
who was there was another rapper who was the guy who was.
Ludacris.
Yeah,
right?
did Ludacris come from 2?
Yeah, he's in 2, but he's also in 5 and 6.
Yeah, I know Ludacris is later. Man, Ludacris in 6.
No, he's in 2. He runs the body shop that Paul's deals with.
Yeah,
He is totally in there.
man, this book. This is some next level dumb right here.
Pretty much.
I hope you feel more confident about your own writing now.
I mean, novelizations are a different kind of art because I assume it's just like produce a novel of this length and you have 6 weeks.
I'm sure it is.
And here's the shooting script, which doesn't tell you much.
Which probably has 3 pages of the car turns left, the car turns right, the car narrowly misses the train, the brake mirror comes off.
Yep. I remember as a kid, the novelization of Batman Forever had scenes that were cut from the movie. Like, it was operating off of the script before it was even being filmed. So there's scenes that aren't even shot that are in the book, and that always messed me up a little, because I read that book before the movie came out.
I remember really enjoying as a kid the novelization for Spider-Man, which had the entire first chapter describing Peter Parker's character in a way that never actually happens in the movie. I don't remember what happened in the rest of the book, but that first bit of Peter's childhood was better than any Spider-Man film. It was still dumb.
A couple years back, someone found a novelization of Spider-Man 3, like, in a garbage can somewhere, and knew to give it to me. And they were right, because I read it.
How good is it? And by how good is it, I mean how bad
It's terrible. It's terrible because it manages to take that movie, which has already got problems, and wring all of the joy out of it because there's no fun dancing scene or Tobey Maguire being goofy emo. Because those are the good parts of that movie.
Yeah, they are. They're the good bits. There's a good article explaining why they're the good bits and the only bits that actually work.
Yeah, it's the Film Crit Hulk article about people don't have the vocabulary to pick apart what parts of the movie don't work, so they just pick them.
I read a different one before the film. Maybe Film Crit Hulk linked to a different article. I mean, I remember the Film Crit Hulk article.
Because basically it's like that is the best scene, so that's why people say that's the worst one when they realize the movie's bad, because it's the only scene that sticks out to them.
I thought it was that it was the most affecting scene, but the affectation is to make you uncomfortable.
Oh, sure. But, like, yeah, it was very much about how vocabulary criticism means you have to be able to dissect what works and doesn't in a broader context of the movie. It was good. It changed a lot about how I look at movies.
It's a good piece. But man,
I mean, Spider-Man 3 is still a bad movie, but for very different reasons.
I saw Spider-Man 3 times in cinema. No, twice.
Oh, wow.
Just twice.
I saw all of them once in the theater, and I own the first 2 on DVD.
Spider-Man 2 saw Spider-Man 1 saw after Spider-Man 2, I think. I kind of want to watch them again.
I haven't seen them in a while either.
Yeah, exactly.
Destiny hasn't seen them. We're done. We should close this down.
Yeah. Shit, yeah.
People don't want to hear us talk about movies again.
I'm gonna end
How
the
far
stream.
did you get? I saw that it was going.